a future with a cure for type 1 diabetes. So, what is type 1 diabetes? Type 1 diabetes is actually an autoimmune disease, and it's where your body's cell attack its own cells and kill all your insulin producing cells. So, according to Beyond Type 1, 1.45 million Americans have type 1 diabetes. So it's very prevalent. There has been about a 21% increase from 2001 to 2009 in diagnoses, and less than a third of people with type 1 consistently achieve target blood glucose levels. So it's a bit of a struggle staying within the range they should. Millions of children and adults live with type 1 diabetes. Managing the highs and the lows of blood sugars creates a constant struggle, and that becomes a part of everyday life, which lasts their entire lifetime. But there is hope for a cure, and new trials have created insulin independence through islet cell transplant, showing promising results for the future, and recent laws are in support of this. So first, let's talk about why I chose this topic and what it means to me. Why did I choose this topic? So about 3 months ago, I knew nothing about type 1 diabetes. I had no experience. I kind of assumed all diabetes was the same. I actually didn't know type 1 was even an autoimmune disease, and I didn't think it would ever affect me or anybody in my family. And then fast forward 3 months ago, I had a family member get diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, what seemed like out of the blue. They had a stomach ache and felt nauseous, and then about 2 weeks later, it continued, and they ended up in the hospital for a week and found out they had type 1 diabetes. So this came as a shock to me. Nobody in my family had type 1 diabetes, and this family member's other side of the family also didn't have type 1 diabetes, and they were a child. So I had never experienced diabetes in children in my family. So it was pretty much a shock. I really didn't think this would happen to us. And according to Breakthrough TD1, roughly about 85% of those diagnosed with type 1 diabetes don't actually have a family history. So that's a common occurrence where this just comes out of nowhere, or at least it feels that way. So what is diabetes? Again, this is where cells, these are called T cells, T immune cells, are attacking your beta insulin producing cells, your islet cells. So cytokines, which are signaling molecules, tell the T cells that to attack. So they start attacking these islet cells, and then they kill all of your insulin producing cells within the body. So it's an autoimmune disease. Type 1 diabetes has a significant impact on blood sugars. So what is a normal blood sugar range for a typical adult? Do you happen to know what that is? It's actually 70 to 140 milligrams. Most people stay within that don't have diabetes. What is the blood sugar range for a typical type 1 diabetic? It's actually just a little higher, 70 to 100 milligrams. However, like we saw in that statistic before, most people struggle to stay within that range. So they're constantly going up and down above that range, which has a plethora of symptoms. So it has a significant impact on blood sugars. So for type 1 diabetics, they experience highs, and eating food with carbs creates highs in the blood sugar because there are no insulin producing cells. So when you eat carbs, you need insulin to produce those carbs and transform that into energy. Your body can't do that anymore. Type 1 diabetic must give themselves insulin for all meals, for carb correction, for lows, and zero carb foods. It's not needed, based on what their own diabetic plan is. Exercise can burn sugar, and therefore type 1 diabetics will need to have higher blood sugar in order to exercise. So they're going to have to eat a snack and not give themselves insulin to get their insulin blood glucose sugars up before they exercise because their body will burn it. So it has an impact on blood sugars for your lows. Type 1 diabetics experience lows sometimes on a regular basis. And sometimes it's unpredictable. Sometimes it could be from exercising. Sometimes it could be from dosing your insulin incorrectly. And a lot of times they're guessing the amount of insulin they need to give themselves based on the amount of food they're predicting themselves to eat. Lows can cause a type 1 diabetic to pass out or become unconscious, and immediate medical intervention would be required. So they'd be unconscious and somebody near them needs to give them sugar. So they actually have a spray you would put up the nose for that. Lows require immediate fast-acting carbs, 15 to 30 grams. So as long as they're conscious and they're having a low, they need to eat a snack quickly before their blood sugar continues to drop and causes them to pass out. So an impact on everyday life for type 1 diabetics, they always need to be prepared with all medical supplies handy. And even in the event of device failures, they need to have backups in place. So always having snacks, insulin, extra pumps, whatever they need to carry that on them. A type 1 diabetic can never take a day off. So the body needs insulin to process sugars, and a type 1 diabetic needs daily monitoring and insulin injections, and even eating sugars to exercise or correct lows. So they have to take constant action in order to prevent any issues with their body. Medical devices for blood sugar. So type 1 diabetics have a plethora of medical devices that make life easier. This is a glucometer. This is your very basic blood glucose testing kit. You would poke your finger with a needle if you were a type 1 diabetic, and then you would put your finger up to this point right here where the poke is. It would then test your blood glucose. You can also get a CGM, which is attached to your body. And the CGM attaches to a phone, a smart device, and it tells you what your blood sugar is all the time. So it's very helpful, and it also alerts you if you're having a low or a high. So medical devices for insulin. Type 1 diabetics always need insulin. They need long-acting and short-acting if they're doing injections. So if they don't have a pump, they have to do injections daily when they eat, and they have to do a long-acting in order to carry through insulin 24 hours throughout the day. The other option is they can have a pump. So they make pumps that have a tube attached, and it attaches on the side, and the tube goes up to your body and attaches somewhere on your body to give you insulin. And some of them act on their own and allow you to just eat freely and get insulin that way. So it's very helpful. People aren't having to give themselves injections constantly. You don't ever see that out in public, and I think this is a lot more sanitary, especially for my family member, because they were having to do it in bathrooms just to be private. And I think the pump has really been life-changing. This is the pump they received. It's called an Omnipod, and it's tubeless. So it just attaches onto the body, and then there's a separate device that goes with it. So Eledon trials is basically Eledon Pharmacy has done a trial recently, and it's been very successful, and even results have come out. They've done islet cell transplants in type 1 diabetics. They used 12 patients, and in 10, according to Eledon Pharmaceuticals, a press release as soon as March 2026, insulin independence has been achieved in 10 of the patients. So it's been very successful and very promising that people may be able to become insulin independent as type 1 diabetics. The other thing that's really cool about this, a lot of the trial patients are on social media. So you can watch them, watch their stories, see how they exercise, and they gladly share all this information. So it's very inspiring and hopeful to watch this. So in conclusion, there are a lot of impacts type 1 diabetics experience from having type 1 diabetes. Everything from how you live your life. When you leave the house, you have to pre-plan everything so that you don't end up in a situation without insulin or without some type of sugar because you're experiencing a low. Right now, this diagnosis is considered lifelong. However, myself, my family members, providers, we all feel very optimistic with this Eledon trial that there's going to be a cure. So with this islet cell transplant, they're showing a lot of evidence now that you can actually cure diabetes. And the big question is immunosuppressants. So they're really focused on that. There's been some legislature as well to move forward with that. So islet cells are now being considered organs instead of experimental. So we are taking huge steps in the future, and I do believe a cure is just around the corner.